How do we understand manaqibs or hagiographies? It's a fairly broad question and one that cannot be answered to any satisfaction here in the 15 to 20 minutes time that we have here. But the question is important because of the types of texts we have decided are and are not hagiographies, or are too fictional to warrant serious study, such as, for instance, Attar's richly layered Ilahinameh, which admittedly is not considered a hagiography in modern scholarship, much to my chagrin. It has been all but banished from the desks of scholars in favor of Attar's Tazkirat al-Awliya, which is one of the most well-known and well-studied medieval hagiographies. The Tazkirat al-Awliya is quite in line with what does get a fair amount of attention, which are the manaqibs or hagiographies that deal with historical saints, and especially those that are associated with a particular moment or movement in the development of early Sufism or Khanaqahs for later periods. These texts detail the circumstances of the birth or early life of the saint, when his or her charisma and holiness was first manifested. Then they transition to adulthood to focus on their sayings and deeds. The deeds most favored by hagiographers are the miraculous, such as healings, mass conversions, and mental projections. These texts impart invaluable historical details about certain orders and the way spiritual and blood genealogies were created, understood, and deployed, which thus, in circular fashion, has been the very reason for the attention they have received. For late antique and medieval Christian hagiographies, there has been a gradual move towards studying a much larger variety of hagiographies, such as those that narrate the lives of fictional saints, or those that historians have banished from their desks for not offering enough historical data. Claudia Rapp is onto something when she proposes that the common purpose of hagiographies is creating a saint. Following Rapp's lead, I read Attar's Ilahinameh as a text that creates a saint's life, but with a twist. The Ilahinameh, I argue, is a kind of exemplary hagiography. Typical hagiographies may be generally characterized as those that in creating a saint offer broad, non-specialized audiences edifying tales of more exemplars to imitate. They are thus prescriptive texts that may offer us invaluable insight into social, religious, and political world from which they emerge. So before we get further into the why we should read the Ilahinameh as a kind or a subtype of exemplary hagiography, we should start with the what and the how. It should be stated at the outset that the Ilahinameh is not concerned with the life of any one particular saint. At the story level, the Ilahinameh is about a caliph who asks his sons, who are consummate kings in their own right, their greatest desires, their purpose, their response, they all want power in one of its various manifestations. And this alerts the caliph to the fact that his sons are lacking in self-knowledge and awareness of the divine. Stopping just short of calling his worldly sons idiots, he understands the base desires driving their goals in life and tries to elevate them, first with his admonishments and then with the various tales he tells. The tales feature a wide variety of characters from the rich cultural well of Islamicate literature and are fused with the spirit of Sufism. His goal is to help his sons to become Sufi kings. At the next story level, and here is where we turn to the crux of the matter, each tale, as I just mentioned, features a wide variety of characters from a broad cross-section of society. Fictional and historical saints and kings occupy the same narrative space as fictional common folk from every walk of life. Each tale is a snapshot of the various mundane and extraordinary moments that may occur in any life. Some characters navigate the situation according to the tenets of Sufism. These are the ideal types, and they usually stand in opposition to unideal types, who provide examples of what actions to avoid. Contrary to expectation, it is the ordinary common folk that more often than not, who is the exemplar. They out-saint the saints and out-faith the kings who traditionally are charged with safeguarding the religion. Thus, at the metatextual level, the Ilahinameh creates examples of holy living for a broad-ranging medieval audience through tales of common folk who act according to the principles of Sufism, more so than the Sufi saints. Thus, this paper argues the Ilahinameh is ontological. It maps the treacherous geography of living within this world and offers a roadmap by which everyone from every walk of life can be saint life. And in this, Attar's trade as the city's apothecary may help us better understand this. As the city's apothecary, he prescribes salves to heal his neighbor's body, and his tales are salves for their souls. And his independence from any court or khanagah helps him see the everyday common man or woman as extraordinary heroes and even saints. If tales featuring ordinary folk and which contain lessons on how to live sounds familiar, it should. The Ilahinameh takes up the formal characteristics of another generic type, namely practical ethics and mirrors for princes, and then disrupts them at the level of meaning to create Sufi kings on the textual level and saints out of ordinary folk, even if only for a moment, on another textual level and as well on the metatextual level. The Ilahinameh can only, I would like to argue, may be understood as an exemplary hagiography in light of the fact that it is a Sufi practical ethics. Thus I read the Ilahinameh as a hybrid text, and here we get to the why we should read the Ilahinameh in this way. I argue that doing so may help us, 1, paint a more detailed picture of the development of medieval literature in general, and Sufi literature in particular, and 2, it may help us gain further insight into Attar's political thought world. Moreover, it may help us better understand the socio-religious conditions on the ground that spurred our hagiographer to compose an every man or woman's hagiography, as I just mentioned, in which the common folk are equal to saints and kings in their responsibility toward the divine. It even, in some ways, complements the Tazkirat al-Awliya. But since I'm arguing that the Ilahinameh may be read as an exemplary hagiography because it is a Sufi practical ethics, let us see how it adopts and disrupts typical practical ethics towards its own aims. As we all know, practical ethics and mirrors are driven by an interest in the meaning of civic culture, the characteristics of a just society, and maintaining political order. These texts have, as it were, a social function, and as such are prescriptive and utilitarian. The secondary aim of certain types of practical ethics and mirrors is reception, to make the philosophical underpinnings of a moral and just society accessible to a general, non-specialist audience. These types of texts accomplish this to varying degrees by using open, exoteric, and entertaining anecdotes and tales of popular historical figures and stock characters, who often occupy the same narrative space. Entertaining generations of Muslim audiences, figures are usually presented as binary opposites, the exemplary model against whom stands the unideal. Such texts are uncomplicated by esoteric terminology and ornate language for maximum effect and comprehensibility. This elegant yet simple style and language, in addition to explicit interjections by the author, make the deeper meanings more accessible. The success and popularity of these works rests, therefore, precisely on the seamless integration of these hallmark characteristics. Put in another way, it rests on the relationship between form, meaning structure and language and style, content, entertaining tales, and meaning, lessons that advance civic culture and political order. Now, for structure and content. One type of practical ethics and mirrors that makes the most of open and popular literature is the frame story embedded narrative structure. This structure, as we all know, has its origins in the ancient Indo-Iranian literary tradition, and the best known examples are Alf Layla wa Layla and Kalila wa Damna. The latter is of significance here because it is a work of practical ethics that was translated into Persian and adapted as a masnavi by the Samanid court poet and famed father of New Persian poetry, Rudaki, who, interestingly enough, makes a few cameo appearances in the Ilahinameh as an ideal type. Generally speaking, the masnavi form has come to be largely associated with medieval Persian romances. However, Rudaki, who composed a number of romances in the masnavi form and set the standard, also illustrated the masnavi's versatility with his version of the Kalila and Demna tales. The Ghaznavid court poet Sannai, in a move that would have an extraordinary impact on the development of Sufi literature, composed his religio-didactic work Hadiqat al-Haqiqa as a masnavi. In addition to being linked by form, the The Ilahinameh and Attar's other masnadis, thus, are a distinctive combination of the Hadiqat al-Haqiqa through meaning and Kalila Demna through content and style. Language and audience. Language and style are signposts that the Ilahinameh adopts and mobilizes practical ethics and mirrors, and as I said before, that broad, non-specialist, ordinary audience is intended. Indeed, much like practical ethics and mirrors, the Ilahinameh is unencumbered by esoteric terminology or lengthy theoretical discourses. It uses the simple yet masterful style with an elegance that belies its simplicity, similar to what Paul Lazinski describes as artfully artless for the Tazkirat, to construct entertaining, easily accessible, and pithy tales brimming with witticisms, all of which make the narratives easily relatable, recitable, and memorizable. Now for meaning and audience. The relationship between form, content, and meaning makes the practical ethics and mirrors ideally suited to prescribing a Sufi way of life. The sophistication of the Ilahinameh is precisely manifest in the very fact that it mobilizes the structure and form of typical practical ethics and mirrors, while it disrupts the latter at the layer of meaning, as I mentioned before. This is most tangible in the relationship between the batin, the interior, and zahir, the exterior. In short, Sufis set great store by the batin, where the heart, the organ that is best able to perceive and commune with the divine, resides. The Sufi adept spends much time and energy learning from the master to condition the zahir, the body sometimes coming close to eviscerating it. The aim is to cultivate and nurture the batin, to bring one as close to spiritual union with the divine in the corporeal world. On one level, the interplay between the batin and zahir in the Ilahinameh is apparent in the way the short stories relate a particular event, while beneath the surface, they are infused with allegorical meaning related to Sufism, thus disrupting the concern with civic culture and political order of typical practical ethics and mirrors. At another, the entire stated frame story, a caliph who in certain respects symbolizes a Sufi master, aims to help his sons, who symbolize wayward, courted initiates, push past the bounds of their external desires to seek deeper spiritual truths and undertake the difficult task of conditioning their bodies and desires to allow their souls to contemplate the divine. At the metatextual level, it might be worth mentioning that the Ilahinameh does not completely circumvent political order and civic culture. It does, however, reshuffle the deck, so to speak. It subordinates the prominent position given to political order and instead advocates steadfastness in faith and awareness and love of the divine. It encourages hemmat in kings, the frame story, and in the populace at large, the narratives and poets' interjections, and thus, as Karl Ernst puts it, public responsibility toward divine law. Put in another way, metaphorically, the zahir, the exercise of political order, is a stepping stone, a precondition for and simultaneously a result of cultivating the batin, creating and maintaining a just society that ascribes to divine law and within which each member of society is equally responsible. While typical mirrors promote such responsibilities across the social spectrum too, the focus is almost always in relation to kings as important intermediaries between society and the divine. Indeed, rulers comprise a hefty portion of all these works, including the Ilahinameh. Kings, accordingly, are the linchpin of a well-ordered and functioning society. When they are just and rule according to the tenets of the religion, they hold spiritual and moral authority as a shadow of God, Zillallah, on earth. They are deserving of obedience from their subjects. And this is, of course, one of the most important aspects illustrated in practical ethics and mirrors. Although such texts may include examples and tales of fallible, corrupt kings as unideal models to reject, however, they primarily highlight the universal and significant role of kings as intermediaries between the divine and the people in creating a stable and just society. It therefore is not incidental that the caliph is an ideal type in the Ilahinameh. However, instead of the well-known ideal of the philosopher king who acts as God's shadow on earth, in its promotion of the essential tenets of Sufism, the Ilahinameh, as I mentioned above, promotes the Sufi king as exemplary model. One other important aspect of practical ethics and mirrors that the Ilahinameh adopts and disrupts is in the atemporality it evokes. Typical practical ethics are roadmaps to help each member of society within their class to avoid the pitfalls of their past counterparts and replicate their successes when possible. These texts do so through the atemporal space they create within the bounds of the text, in which ancient and contemporary figures easily occupy, the timeless ideals of society and kingship for which they advocate, and by promoting a normative version of Islam whereby ideological differences are obscured when not repudiated. The atemporality that is expressed in the Ilahinameh is constructed similarly, it espouses a different kind of universalism. It instead promotes a universal faith rooted in love of the divine, a space that erodes ethnic, gender, religious, sectarian, class, and linguistic differences. It is in this individual responsibility to divine law and love, displayed through edifying tales, that offers an opportunity to explore the Ilahinameh as a hybrid text, part Sufi Practical Ethics, where each member of society is responsible for building a moral and just society according to the tenets of Sufism, whereas in Practical Ethics and Mirrors, the focus is on everyone's relationships to the king to maintain social stability. And it's one part exemplary hagiography, one that aims to create saintly life among the populace at large. Indeed, hagiographies, even as they create a saint's life, are nevertheless exemplary. They offer examples of holiness for their audiences to imitate. And here we turn then to the differences and similarities between the Tazkirat and Ilahinameh that may help shed some light on the matter. The Ilahinameh, like the Tazkirat, is a collection of edifying and exemplary tales that features many of the same saints as the Tazkirat, if not more, and they both brim full of tales of folks from every walk of life. The focus of the Tazkirat, as one might expect, is on the saints themselves, who are exemplars par excellence. In the Ilahinameh, by contrast, the focus is shifted evenly across all members of society who act in exemplary ways. Except, interestingly enough, with the exception of women, Majnun, Moses, and Jesus, no one group or person ever holds the moral high ground at all times in the not even the saints. And not even the same saints who hold absolutely the moral high ground at all times in the Tazkirat. Take, for instance, the story of Sheikh Bayezid, who converts a Zoroastrian to Islam. After the conversion, Bayezid is inconsolable. He exclaims that after 70 years of being a Zoroastrian, he's instantly saved. The Sheikh may be a bit envious. This story is then followed by another story about the capriciousness of God's will. The lesson for everyone, including the Sheikh, is that no one ever knows who is filled with God's grace, whatever religion he has been born into, so be good to your neighbors. Contrast this with the story of Abu Bakr Wasiti in the Tazkirat, who when he converts a Zoroastrian, it is his disciples who get a little grumpy and complain. They grumble that after 40 years of being a Zoroastrian, just like that, poof, he's a Muslim? Wasiti cleverly responds by asking what do they make of the Prophet Muhammad's first 40 years before he was called to prophethood. The lesson on one level may be to respect the power of confessional and spiritual conversion, but so too is the authority of the saint on full display in his active mercy and cleverness. In one of the final stories of the Ilahinameh, Sheikh Bayezid seems to have finally learned his lesson, when one day, a few days before his own death, he converts another Zoroastrian. Again, shocked that a 70-year-old Zoroastrian should gain salvation at such a late stage, this time he dons the Zoroastrian zonar and then rips it to shreds. When asked the meaning of his actions, the Sheikh said the action is symbolic. He is renewing his faith. The Sheikh, at the end of his life, figures out what the disciples of the Saint Tustari, and even the common folk attending Tustari's disciples, figure out easily and rather quickly in a rather dramatic tale. Since most of our earlier discussion had to do with kings, let us now turn to a story about Sultan Mahmud Ghaznavi. A significant number of Mahmud's tales center on his love affair with his slave Ayaz, who is the king's authoritative teacher of love in its physical and spiritual manifestations. In other tales, the Sultan's authoritative teachers are old peasant women who remind the king of his religious commitment to social justice. There is one marked exception. In one tale, it is a Zoroastrian merchant who teaches the world-conquering Sultan, who was responsible for innumerable conversions that forever would change the social religious landscape of India. He would teach the king about right governance, social justice, and religion. The merchant, seeing a need for a bridge, builds it with his own funds. The Sultan one day happens along the road and, seeing the new beautiful bridge, inquires after its patron. When Mahmud discovers the patron is a Zoroastrian, he's immediately dismissive. He thinks him unworthy because of his religion. This, despite the fact that the maintenance of infrastructure is the duty of kings who collect taxes from the populace, presumably for this purpose. The Sultan insists on remunerating him. The Zoroastrian shows the Sultan what the price of the bridge is, and it is not gold or his faith. He throws himself off the bridge and into the water rather than subject his faith to a belligerent king. The narrator praises the Zoroastrian for his steadfastness in faith and admonishes the king and audience that in their negligence to the faith, they have much to learn about Islam from a Zoroastrian. In this story, the contrast between protagonist and antagonist is striking. A historical ruler, the one expected to be the protagonist, and who is lauded in the culture for his contributions to the expansion and safeguarding of normative Islam, is one-upped, and rather embarrassingly so, by a fictional merchant Zoroastrian, the actual protagonist. Not willing to be bullied by a worldly king, in his self-sacrifice, the Zoroastrian, interestingly, is a type of martyr that slightly echo those in Christian martyrdoms. And it's interesting that we're here in Tbilisi, where the bridge right around the corner, Metri Bridge, is the bridge where 100,000 Christian martyrs threw themselves. Though not every tale features a saint, nevertheless, the Ilahinameh is, I argue, a type of exemplary hagiography. For one brief, shining moment, a catamite even can out-saint a saint, and a Zoroastrian can out-faith the king most famous for safeguarding and expanding Islam. This is in contrast to the moralizing words and deeds of saints in the Tazkirat, however entertainingly they may have been wrought by a master poet. Accordingly, then, one need not be necessarily a saint to live a wholly exemplary life. If we consider the frame story of the Ilahinameh, which is about creating saint kings, and its individual tales which are infused with the spirit of Sufism, and the individuals from every cross-section of life are exemplary models who teach its principles, the individual tales then are snapshots of what a holy life looks like in everyday circumstances by everyday people. And in this we have a clear vision of Attar's political thought world. The public, as well as rulers, have a triple responsibility towards faith and spirituality, towards each other, and towards the maintenance of social justice and stability. Thank you.